The L train rattles over Halstead at Archer like it has for 100 years, throwing sparks against the steel rails. Morning light creeps across brick two-flats and narrow porches with coffee cups cool on chipped ledges of open windows. Bridgeport, Chicago, a neighborhood built on smoke, factory whistles, and families that never left. In the 1960s, this was a world of corner taverns, parish churches, and streets where everybody knew your name and your business. From these blocks came a certain kind of man, tough, loyal, careful with his words. Ronnie Jarrett grew up in that rhythm, surrounded by old-timers who measured a person not by what he said, but by what he could handle. Bridgeport taught you to mind your own, to keep to your own, and never forget who you belong to or where you came from. But for some, the neighborhood wasn't just home. It was a doorway into something darker, something more powerful. The outfit had deep roots here, and young men learned early that opportunity sometimes wore a crooked suit and spoke with a quiet voice. Welcome back to James on the Mob, ladies and gents. I'm James Jenkins, your host and narrator. Ronnie Jarrett, from neighborhood kid to outfit associate, and into a story that still echoes through Chicago's underworld. By the time he was old enough to understand that the outfit wasn't some distant rumor, that it was part of the neighborhood architecture, as familiar as church bells on Sunday. Jarrett would find himself drawn deeper into that world than most would ever dare to go. In this episode, we step on to those Bridgeport streets and follow the path of the man they called the little guy. Thursday, December 23rd, 1999. The Bridgeport neighborhood of Chicago is deep in the grip of a brutal winter. While most residents are preparing for Christmas, 55-year-old Ronnie Jarrett is preparing for the funeral of a relative this morning. Jarrett, a man known to the FBI as a vicious thug and high-ranking lieutenant in the South Side's 26th Street crew, steps out of his home. As he walked towards his car, the silence of the residential street was shattered as a hail of gunfire erupted. This wasn't just a random street crime. It was a preventive strike by the Chicago outfit. It was the first mob-related assassination in Chicago in 7 years and would be the last of the 20th century. Ronnie Jarrett didn't die that morning. He would cling on to life in a Chicago hospital for over a month, finally succumbing to his wounds on January 25th, 2000. His death signaled the end of an era and the start of a trail that would eventually lead to the greatest Chicago mob trial in Chicago history, Operation Family Secrets. Jarrett was mixed Irish-Italian and grew up during the post-World War II peak of the Chicago outfit's power. Born on August 30th, 1944, his father's name may have been Roy or Roy Lee Jarrett. His mother's maiden name was Catherine Bonomo. Jarrett was raised in an environment where organized crime was a key structural element of the community, ultimately leading him to join the South Side's 26th Street crew, also known as the Chinatown or Bridgeport crew. He later reflected on his upbringing by describing a stable but economically disadvantaged household. He characterized his parents as hard-working people who maintained a loving, happy home, yet they were poor enough that the family never owned a car. Despite his later career as a vicious thug, Jarrett maintained that he had been raised right and that his entry into professional criminality was a matter of personal choice rather than a lack of parental guidance. However, his formal education was secondary to his apprenticeship on the streets. By his early 20s, Jarrett was already a known professional criminal. Recorded criminal history with Ronald Jarrett began in 1962 with his first arrest. During the 1960s and early 1970s, he established himself as an up-and-coming professional criminal. He went on to be arrested close to 60 times and had over a dozen convictions for various crimes, including robbery, assaulting a federal officer, auto theft, weapons violations, and burglary. His first prison term came in 1965, and he subsequently served penitentiary time in the 70s and the 80s. Jarrett served various sentences in local and state facilities. During this era, he became recognized by a Maid outfit member and became a close associate, frequently performing duties as a driver and bodyguard for Angelo the Hook La Pietra, a bona fide member and boss of the 26th Street crew. Jarrett's entry into the outfit's 26th Street crew occurred as the unit was evolving from a traditional specialization in cargo theft and truck hijacking into a more diversified organization focused on illegal gambling, loan sharking, and sophisticated burglaries. Jarrett quickly distinguished himself as an enforcer, burglar, and general thug under the mentorship of Capo Angelo J. the Hook La Pietra, moving from street-level theft into the syndicate's real money rackets. This career path was marked by extreme loyalty to the code of silence, a trait he demonstrated early in his career when he refused to testify before grand juries regarding the burglary murders, or Burgmer's investigation in the late 1970s. The pedigree of the 26th Street crew traces directly back to the foundational years of the Chicago Syndicate. The original architect of this power base was Bruno Rodi Sr., known as Bruno the Bomber, a contemporary and henchman of Al Capone. Rodi was a seminal figure who bridged the gap between the chaotic Black Hand extortionists of the early 1900s and the corporate-style organized crime of the mid-century. Rodi owned a grocery store on the 2100 block of South Wentworth Avenue, a location strategically situated less than 6 blocks from Capone's headquarters at the Lexington Hotel. This grocery store served as more than a place of commerce. It was a nexus for the distribution of illegal alcohol during Prohibition and a clearinghouse for neighborhood intelligence. Roddy established the model of the benevolent Don in the neighborhood, a figure who provided protection and dispensed favors in exchange for absolute loyalty and silence. When Bruno Rodi Sr. died in 1956, he left behind a vacuum that was filled not by a violent usurper, but by his son-in-law, Frank Skits Caruso. Meanwhile, Bruno's son, Fred, went on to become a First Ward politician who politically shielded the entire outfit and specifically the 26th Street crew. This dynastic succession cemented the Rodi-Caruso alliance, a blood pact that would dominate Southside crime and politics for the next 30 years. Frank T. Skids Caruso, born December 26, 1911, represented the golden age of the outfit's integration of crime and politics. Originally from Chicago's near north side, Caruso's criminal pedigree was forged with ties to the infamous 42 gang. He was the brother of Joseph Joe Shoes Caruso and the brother-in-law of Fred Rodi, a future First Ward alderman and high-level outfit fixer. Caruso's formal criminal record began in 1935, and he eventually amassed at least 13 arrests for charges including grand larceny, illegal gambling, and conspiracy. During these formative years, Caruso established the deep familial and criminal ties that would define his leadership. Under Caruso, 26th Street Crew's headquarters were understated and embedded in the community fabric. And throughout the 1930s through the 1970s, operations were run out of nondescript storefronts along West 26th Street, most notably a location that was formerly Garibaldi's Deli at 266-68 West 26th Street. These locations were social hubs as much as criminal command centers, places where neighborhood men would gather to play cards, drink espresso, and seek favors. The crew's ability to adapt to changing demographics, specifically the expansion of Chinatown, became a hallmark of its operational genius. Rather than fighting the influx of Chinese merchants, the 26th Street crew, under leaders like Caruso and La Pietra, integrated them into their revenue stream. They instituted a street tax on the Chinese gambling houses, notably the On Leong Tong, generating millions of dollars in tribute that flowed directly into the outfit's coffers. The transition from Frank Caruso to Angelo LaPietra was not a hostile coup, but rather a gradual evolution necessitated by changing environmental pressures. As the 1970s progressed, the outfit faced new challenges. The FBI began using more sophisticated surveillance, including Title III wiretaps. The RICO Act, passed in 1970, gave prosecutors new tools to dismantle criminal enterprises, and simultaneously, the older generation of the 42 gang was aging. Frank Caruso remained the nominal boss of the crew until his death from natural causes in 1983. However, operational day-to-day control began to shift toward a younger, more aggressive generation led by Angelo LaPietra in the late 1970s. This period was marked by overlapping authority, where Caruso served as the elder statesman and political liaison, while LaPietra handled the street work and the increasingly complex logistics of the Las Vegas skim. Angelo LaPietra was born on October 30th, 1920, in Cicero, Illinois, to first-generation immigrants from Naples, Italy. He began his criminal apprenticeship, at first in Cicero under Joseph Doves Ayupa. LaPietra's formal criminal record commenced in 1938 and eventually included a wide range of charges, such as murder, kidnapping, and narcotics. LaPietra cut a starkly different figure than the political smooth talkers of the First Ward. LaPietra was a street guy in the truest sense, a man who had come up through the ranks as an enforcer and was comfortable with the visceral brutality of the trade. By the late 1950s, he was a rising power in the 26th Street crew. LaPietra's nickname, The Hook, is one of the most popular, feared monikers in Chicago mob lore. Popular legend, often repeated in media and by law enforcement sources, hold that the name derived from his preferred method of torture, hanging victims by a meat hook through their rib cage and torturing them to death with a blowtorch. However, alternative explanations from within the organization suggest a more metaphorical, though no less sinister, origin. Associates claim the name referred to the hooks he had in other people once they accepted a juice loan. The idea that once indebted to LaPietra, a victim was on the hook for life, often forced to surrender property, businesses, or their own freedom to service the debt. Regardless of the etymology, the nickname served its purpose. It terrified debtors and rivals alike, ensuring compliance without the need for constant violence. LaPietra's reign oversaw a diverse, lucrative portfolio of illicit activities. The crew collected a significant percentage of profits from illegal Fantan and Mahjong games operating behind storefronts in Chinatown on Wentworth Avenue. In 1994, it was revealed that organizations like the On Leong Chinese Merchants Association had been forced to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in street tax to LaPietra's organization for the privilege of operating their casinos. LaPietra built a large, fortress-like home in Bridgeport, located on the West 200 block of 30th Street near Comiskey Park, signaling his permanence and dominance in the neighborhood. He also moved the crew's operational headquarters in 1981 to a building he had constructed from what one could reasonably assume was from Las Vegas skim profits at 3031 South Shields Avenue, the old neighborhood Italian-American club, which still operates today as a passive monument to the hook. As capo, LaPietra directed an elite group of enforcers assigned to some of the outfit's most difficult and sensitive contracts. This group included his top lieutenants, such as his brother, James Jimmy the Lapper LaPietra, John Big Stoop Fecarata, John Johnny Apes Monteleone, and the Calabrese brothers, Frankie Breeze Sr. and Nicky Slim, and Ronnie the Little Guy Jarrett. And it can only be wondered if Ronnie Jarrett had achieved what might have been his boyhood dream, to become another generation of neighborhood history. By the 1970s, Jarrett was a core member of a sophisticated robbery, loan sharking, and hit squad, led by Frankie Breeze Calabrese Sr., which included Frank's brother, Nicholas Nicky Slim, and later, nominally, Calabrese's son, Frank Jr. The operational success and lethal reputation of Chicago's 26th Street crew were predicated on a system of tactical preparation and technical expertise. Central to this was the use of workshops, discrete locations, such as garages, basements, or closed businesses, where enforcers could prepare equipment for gangland contracts. Jarrett utilized his mother-in-law's garage at 2820 South Low as the crew's workshop and laboratory to store weapons and tools, plan and practice upcoming hits, and to house and modify autos to be used for work. And sometimes, it was a place to do the actual work. Legend has it that the gun that killed Sam Giancana in 1975 was stored and modified in the mother-in-law's garage. The crew's first hit together was that of a loan collector named Michael Hambone Albergo in August of 1970, who had recently been letting it be known that if he had to go to jail over recently issued subpoenas by the Illinois Crime Investigating Commission, that he wasn't going alone. That was a fatal mistake. Calabrese went to La Pietra for permission for the hit. It was green-lighted. Ronnie Jarrett was the driver who picked up Albergo to meet the Calabrese brothers. At a designated spot, Jarrett and the Calabrese brothers strangled Albergo, and Frank Calabrese slit Albergo's throat, the Calabrese necktie. After this hit, they went to the workshop to change clothes. The 1976 murder of Chicago outfit associate Paul Haggerty stands as a representative example of the lethal discipline maintained by the Southside's 26th Street crew. Executed as a professional contract sanctioned by the highest levels of the syndicate's hierarchy, the hit involved once again Ronnie Jarrett and the notorious Calabrese brothers. The details of the conspiracy remained a family secret for nearly 3 decades until they were meticulously unraveled during the landmark 2005 Operation Family Secrets investigation and the subsequent federal trial in 2007. The outfit bosses wanted Haggerty questioned about his dealings with a mobbed-up suburban Elmwood Park jewelry store, and then they wanted him killed. Ronnie Jarrett's involvement in the Haggerty murder was significant, reflecting his status as one of La Pietra's primary enforcers. Nicholas Calabrese testified that Jarrett participated alongside himself, Frank Sr., and Frank Goomba Saladino in the surveillance and planning of the murder. After weeks of stalking their prey, Haggerty was pulled off a Chicago street and taken to Jarrett's workshop. There, he was questioned by Angelo La Pietra and James Turk Torello. Not satisfied with his answers, they left Haggerty to his fate. He was beaten, strangled, and Frank Calabrese Sr. cut his throat. In December 1977 and January 1978, 2 events would occur that would have a huge impact on the course of Jarrett's life. First, Jarrett had participated in the $39,000 robbery of the Orange Blossom Jewelry Store in Oak Lawn, Illinois on December 15, 1977. 2 men who had participated in the robbery with Jarrett would later verify that he was a co-conspirator in the Orange Blossom robbery. The 2 were later granted immunity in exchange for their testimony concerning Jarrett's participation. This would come back to haunt Ronnie a little bit later. Also, in December 1977, a crew of burglars led by John Mendel participated in the robbery of a Levinson jewelry store at 739 43 North Clark Street, Chicago, netting somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 million in jewelry. Unbeknownst to the crew, the store was owned by a friend of Tony Accardo, a jeweler and Jewish bookmaker who paid the outfit for protection. Accardo, then the outfit's elder statesman and boss of bosses, ordered a full-court press, all-points bulletin on the burglars. The jewelry was soon recovered from a fence Mendel had utilized and placed in a safe spot pending its return to Levinson. Resenting the return of the jewelry and feeling unappreciated by the syndicate's leadership, Mendel's crew decided, stupidly, to boost the boss. On the morning of January 6, 1978, while Ricardo and his wife Clarice were vacationing in Palm Springs, California, the crew broke into the Ricardo residence located at 1407 North Ashland Avenue in River Forest, Illinois. Using Mendel's expertise to bypass sophisticated alarm systems, the burglars ransacked the mansion. Although initially reported as having nothing stolen, subsequent events revealed that the crew had taken significant cash and personal items, including Ricardo's gold cufflinks. Mendel was a dead man walking, and vengeance would come quick. Jarrett's role as an enforcer often required him to lure victims to specific locations. The relationship between Ronnie Jarrett and John Mendel was one of professional collaboration between fellow burglars. In the years leading up to 1978, the two had operated in high-end burglary rings that utilized Mendel's technical skill with electronics and Jarrett's reputation for muscle. For this reason, Jarrett and the crew were chosen to lure Mendel to the crew's workshop under the pretext of having some jewels he wanted to boost. On the evening of January 15, 1978, waiting in the workshop in the dark were Frank and Nick Calabrese and Goomba Saladino. As soon as Jarrett pulled the car into the garage and the car doors opened, Mendel was pounced upon and then severely beaten, stabbed, and, per the ritual, he was strangled by rope, and this time, Nick Calabrese cut Mendel's throat. John Mendel disappeared. His body was found over a month later, on February 20th, in the trunk of his 1971 Oldsmobile at 6300 South Campbell Avenue. On February 4th, Vincent Moretti, the Mark burglary crew's fence for all of its stolen property, along with another small-time crook named Don Reno, were lured to a Cicero, Illinois bar, where besides Jarrett and the Calabreses were Johnny Apes Manalone and two Cicero Wild Bunch crew members, William Butch Petroselli and Tony Borsellino. Moretti and Reno were beaten and stomped to death. Reno had nothing to do with the Ricardo robbery. He simply happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The double homicide came to be referred to as the Strangers in the Night Murders because of the Johnny Mathis song playing on the jukebox as Moretti and Reno were slaughtered. Moretti, a former police officer, had been seen wearing Ricardo's gold cufflinks around town in the days before he was killed. In the summer of 1978, the FBI and the Department of Justice Organized Crime and Racketeering Section, Chicago Strike Force, began the burglary murders, or the Burgmers investigation. The investigation focused on a number of burglaries and subsequent murders of burglars associated with organized crime in Chicago. Ronald Jarrett, a known professional criminal and burglar allegedly with mob ties, was a suspect in this investigation. A Chicago Strike Force Special Attorney, S.G. Hugo, who was assigned to a special September 1978 grand jury and panel for the Burgmers investigation, decided to prosecute Jarrett for a weapons violation unrelated to the Burgmers investigation, to turn up the pressure for him to talk after Jarrett had appeared before the special grand jury and refused to answer questions relating to the investigation on the basis of his Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination. This indictment was dismissed when Jarrett prevailed on a motion to suppress for lack of probable cause on January 30th, 1980. It would be a short reprieve. Meanwhile, the 1980 murders of William Billy Dauber and his wife Charlotte represent one of the most high-profile and brutal contract killings in the history of the Chicago Outfit's Southside operations. This double homicide was the culmination of a decade-long power struggle within the syndicate's chop shop rackets and a growing paranoia among outfit leadership regarding potential government informants. Ronnie Jarrett played a primary role as one of the executioners in the four-man hit team. William Dauber was a prolific mobster and hitman who established his reputation as a top associate in the Chicago Outfit's lucrative Southside Chop Chop ring. Born in Chicago and later a resident of Blue Island, Dauber was brought into the syndicate by James "Jimmy the Bomber" Katuara, who controlled, in addition to shop operations, illegal gambling and vice on the South Side, and who was himself murdered in 1978. The hit was professionally orchestrated to occur immediately following a legal appearance by the couple. On July 2, 1980, the Daubers were at the Will County Courthouse, where they received a continuation from Judge Angelo Pistilli on drug and weapons charges. As the couple began their drive home in their Oldsmobile, a hit squad followed them into the rural area of Will County. The team consisted of 4 seasoned outfit enforcers: Frank Calabrese Sr., Ronnie Jarrett, William Butch Petroselli, and Gerald Scarpelli. The hit team utilized a Ford van to intercept the couple at the southwest corner of Manhattan Monee and Shea Road. Pulling alongside the moving Oldsmobile, the gunman opened fire with an M1 carbine and a 12-gauge shotgun. Dauber attempted to evade the gunfire, but the car careened off the road and crashed into an apple tree. The hit squad then set the vehicle on fire before fleeing the scene. The couple was found dead inside the car, which had 3 windows blown out and was crushed against the apple tree. The Ford van used in the attack was found abandoned approximately 1 mile from the crash site. Jarrett's participation in the 1977 Orange Blossom jewelry heist eventually led to a lengthy term of incarceration. On October 29, 1980, Jarrett was indicted for the Orange Blossom robbery. And in 1981, following a jury trial, Jarrett was convicted of armed robbery. He was sentenced as a dangerous special offender to 25 years in federal prison. And on January 21, 1983, the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed Jarrett's conviction, dismissing his claims of selective and vindictive prosecution. Ronnie Jarrett would spend the rest of the 1980s and early 90s in a federal prison, maintaining his code of silence and never cooperating with the government. Upon his release in 1993, Jarrett returned to his home base in Chicago's Bridgeport neighborhood, residing in the 3000 block of South Low Avenue. He was officially recognized by law enforcement and outfit associates as a trusted lieutenant within the 26th Street Crew. During this era, the Crew was one of the most stable and violent units of the Chicago outfit, deeply entrenched in illegal sports bookmaking, loan sharking, and labor racketeering across the South Side. Jarrett was described by federal investigators as a master thief who maintained a reputation for personal volatility. Sources from the period indicate that he had a penchant for assaulting law enforcement officers and engaging in disruptive behavior at local establishments, which frequently drew unwanted police attention to the Crew's discreet operations. Despite this, he remained a significant juice collector and fence, utilizing his extensive experience in professional burglary and safecracking to oversee high-stakes theft rings. While Jarrett was active on the streets, his longtime partner, Frank Calabrese Sr., was incarcerated in a federal penitentiary alongside his son, Frank Calabrese Jr. During this period, Frank Jr. began the process of defecting from the organization, eventually reaching out to the FBI in 1998 with an offer to wear a wire against his father. Jarrett remained a good soldier for the 26th Street Crew's interests until his death, unaware that the internal fragmentation of the Calabrese family would soon lead to the total exposure of the Crew's historical crimes. His mentor, Angelo LaPietra, had been identified as a senior figure in the syndicate who coordinated with other national mob leaders from Kansas City, Milwaukee, and Cleveland to loot the Teamster Pension Fund. In 1986, LaPietra's reign as active boss of the 26th Street Crew effectively ended when he pleaded guilty to charges related to the Las Vegas skimming operation. He was sentenced to 16 years in federal prison, and despite his incarceration, he remained a revered senior figure within the Southside hierarchy. Leadership of the Crew had transitioned to, at first, his brother James, Jimmy the Lapper LaPietra, and later to Johnny Apes Monteleone. LaPietra died in March of 1998. Jarrett's terminal conflict originated and his relationship with Johnny Apes Monteleone, the overseer of Southside operations and a former acting boss of the Chicago outfit in 1993. By the late 1990s, Monteleone governed the 26th Street crew from social hubs like the old neighborhood Italian-American Club. Jarrett was reputedly under the auspices of Monteleone, but the relationship was defined by increasing friction over the control of street territory and the reporting of gambling profits. Speculation within the underworld and information later gathered by investigators suggested several possible motives for the falling out. Monteleone and other senior figures believed that Jarrett was shortchanging the organization on proceeds from his independent gambling ventures and juice collections. Jarrett was rumored to be attempting to climb the organizational ladder too quickly, challenging the established hierarchy represented by Monteleone. And due to his aggressive personality, Jarrett had cultivated a vast number of enemies within the outfit, leading one investigator to note that at the time of his death, there were more suspects than we could count. The resolution of the Monteleone-Jarrett feud occurred on the morning of December 23, 1999, as Ronnie Jarrett left his home in the 3000 block of South Low Avenue in Chicago's Bridgeport neighborhood to attend the funeral of a relative and a fellow mob associate. He was ambushed by a gunman and left in the street. The reputed killer was tough Tony Calabrese, no relation to Frank or Nick. The murder of Ronnie Jarrett proved to be a strategic miscalculation for the outfit's long-term survival. When Frank Calabrese Jr., who was incarcerated with his father at the time, learned of the hit on Jarrett, it reputedly became a primary psychological catalyst for his decision to cooperate with the FBI. Frank Jr. realized that the outfit was cannibalizing its most loyal soldiers, leading him to offer to wear a wire against his father. John Monteleone's career was later laid bare during the landmark 2007 Operation Family Secrets trial. Although he died in 2003, before the case began, the testimony provided a vivid picture of his role as the leader of the South Side's most lethal crew. The transition from the Hook La Pietra era to the Monteleone administration represented the final peak of the outfit's neighborhood-based power, after which the organization's traditional structure began to collapse under the weight of its own internal betrayals. So goes the story of Ronnie Jarrett. Jarrett's life traced the arc of Chicago's old neighborhood outfit era. Born in Bridgeport, shaped by the 26th Street crew, hardened by prison, and pulled back into a world that never truly lets its own walk away. He moved through the burglaries, violence, murders, and internal rivalries that defined a generation of street-level enforcers. But, like so many of his contemporaries, Jarrett's story didn't end quietly. Long after the hits and the heist faded into rumor, the federal government began assembling a larger picture. In 2007, during the historic Family Secrets trial, testimony and evidence would reopen the chapters of that era, exposing the machinery behind the crimes and placing men like Jarrett back into the public record. In the end, his life became part of something larger than himself, the unraveling of the Chicago outfit's code of silence. And in the comments below, let me know your thoughts on the little guy and the 26th Street crew. I'm James Jenkins. If you've enjoyed this segment about a neighborhood boy who joined his neighborhood gang, y'all know what to do. Smash up that up thumb, subscribe, share, and look out for another James on the Mob episode. And remember, life is short, so don't whack it off. Say yes.